Daly, you're a Martin Scorsese fan, aren't you?
Yes.
I think not only is the guy a brilliant filmmaker, but I think one of the things in his style that makes it so unique to him is not just the mobster motifs and these crazy characters, but in every one of his movies, he forces you to answer the question, how far is too far? How far is too far to take care of the family? How far is too far, when you're trying to get information out of a person?
Mm-hmm.
And in his movie, The Departed, he begs the question, how far is too far for an undercover agent to go when the lines of morality are blurred in order for you to do your duty, to catch the bad guy? How far do you go before what you're really doing is serving yourself? Today we're going to look at two federal agents who went to prison for the actions that they took on the Silk Road while investigating Ross Ulbricht. They tampered with evidence, and there's a possibility that even during the court case, that they were changing things on the Silk Road in order to make Ross look guilty. Both of these guys went to prison for a combined 13 years, while Ross Ulbricht, who they put there, went for 2 life sentences plus 40 years. This is episode 3 of the untold story of Ross Ulbricht, the Silk Road, and the Dread Pirate Roberts.
This call is from a federal prison.
I want you to understand what it means to lose your freedom.
29-year-old Ross William Ulbricht, a.k.a. Dread Pirate Robert.
I am not the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Operating a sophisticated illegal drug website.
I inherited the ship from the previous Dread Pirate Roberts, just as you would inherit it from me.
The FBI spent 2 years trying to find the man behind the site.
The man I inherited it from was not the real Dread Pirate Roberts either. Then he explained that the name was the important thing in inspiring the necessary fit. You see, no one would surrender to the Dread Pirate.
Ross Ulbricht, I'll finally leave prison, but I'll be in a body bag.
So where we left off was in this really pivotal point of the story. Episode 1, we explored what the Silk Road was. There's a lot of technical terminology. We talked about Bitcoin. We talked about the onion router. And if you haven't listened to episode 1 and you start hearing some of those acronyms, I would tell you probably need to go do it, just so that you can keep up with all of the weird pieces of tech and so that you've got working definitions for them. In episode 2, we introduced a couple of the key players from today, and that is the two federal agencies, both Homeland Security agencies, in the Chicago office headed by Jared Duryagan, and in the Baltimore office headed by McFarland. Right. So at the end of episode 2, we talked about how they are in competition for the lead investigator role on the Silk Road case. Right now, there are some other characters that we need to just set a tone for before we dive too far into this, because there's a lot of new names that are going to be added today. So let's talk about who we already know, and then we'll add these other names kind of one at a time as we go through the story. So Duryagan is in control of the Chicago Homeland Security Office. He's investigating the Silk Road and has traced it back to a guy named Mark Karpeles. Karpeles is a French businessman who resides in Japan and is doing most of his business there. He runs an organization called Mt. Go, which Mt. Go is the largest Bitcoin exchange on the internet at that time. All right, so that's number 1. The second guy that you need to be aware of is Karpeles's kind of right-hand guy in this investigation, according to Duryagan, and that is Ashley Bart. And I apologize if these names change from episode to episode, but as we're doing more research, that's what's happening. So I think we called him Duryagan in the other, but it's spelled Deryghian. So if you got a better way to pronounce that, we apologize if we're butchering that name.
The spelling is accurate. The pronunciation, we're doing our best.
Deryghian. And so Mark Karpelis and Ashley Barr become the center of Deryghian's investigation.
Mm-hmm.
When he submits it to C3, which C3 is the sort of global Homeland Security agency where they're looking at a lot of different things, McFarland finds it. They say, we actually have a case open on the Silk Road as well. They look at it. McFarland's case is way underdeveloped. Deryghian gives all of the information about their case to C3, and it's all supposed to stay in-house in Homeland Security. Well, that's not really what happens.
Mm-hmm.
McFarland, in an effort to get this case and to be the lead investigator on it, McFarland goes and gives all of this information to the IRS and the DEA and the Secret Service so that it looks like Baltimore's DEA has all of the same information that Deryghian did, so it doesn't look like he has anything unique. And now if the Baltimore DEA and the Baltimore Homeland Security Agency are in on it, they've got all of Deryghian's information, they've got a file that looks like they had it all, that they uniquely found it, then there's no reason why Baltimore shouldn't take point. However, Deryghian goes directly to McFarland and said, hey, we've looked at what the DEA has from Baltimore. Did you give that to them?
Yeah, it's oddly familiar.
And McFarland, in his very cocky and flippant way, which we will see throughout the course of this investigation, says, yeah, I wanted this case. Absolutely, I gave it to him. So because he makes this public knowledge, I say public knowledge.
Internally.
It's internally public within the acronym organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Within the CIA, within the FBI, within the IRS, within Homeland Security, within C3.
DEA.
But also the DEA and the Secret Service.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really weird players in here that I would not typically associate with this type of investigation. The one that is not named, oddly enough, is the NSA.
Mm-hmm.
Which we're told is who takes point on these kind of investigations.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a cyber crime. And yet, the NSA, throughout this entire investigation, goes completely unnamed until the court case, which we'll get into in a later episode. So knowing now that all of these extra players have this information, it was later discovered that McFarland leaked investigation details to 2 Baltimore agents who, using theft, extortion, and other means, had enriched themselves through their involvement in the Silk Road. One was this DEA agent named Carl Mark Force. The other was a Secret Service agent named Sean Bridges. And so these guys are using this information that they found in order to infiltrate the Silk Road. Now, they are, neither one of them, actually named in the Homeland Security files as guys who were part of this investigation. They're just guys that had this info now on the Silk Road, what the Silk Road did. And one of the things that's really interesting about these two is not just that they were armed with that information, but specifically Sean Bridges, the Secret Service agent, was on a joint duty assignment with the NSA. So what that means is that this agent, that Sean Bridges, was working on loan from the Secret Service with the NSA. And as the government would state, these 2 agents, they stated this in court when in the United States versus Carl Mark Force and United States versus Sean Bridges. United States agents said these two sought deliberately to undermine the integrity of the ongoing investigation. So where this is beginning to take place, our main character that we've talked about, Ross Ulbricht, is no longer involved in the Silk Road.
Mm-hmm.
At least not in an admin capacity.
What's the time frame of this right now? When do we know when Bridges and Mark Force? I mean, because they went rogue. I don't know if there's anything in the public record of when they actually show up.
They show up after things have been transferred. So after Karpeles' involvement. So this would have been after November of 2011 and probably post February 2012.
And this is when we see the exit of Silk Road admin and the entrance of
the Dread Pirate Roberts.
So
now focus
now running the Silk Road.
Right. Now the focus is on trying to capture the Dread Pirate Roberts. So the investigation begins. And 7 months into the Silk Road investigation, Bridges goes rogue. Now, Bridges is on a joint duty assignment with the NSA and the Secret Service. Bridges is supposed to be helping with this investigation. There's a lot of mystery around whether or not Karl Mark Force was supposed to have any involvement and what that was supposed to be. But it is colluded in the court case that he was, because if he isn't and he has all of this information, this turns into a really bad situation for the U.S. government. Evidence is no longer admissible in court, things that he discovered.
Which has been my question this whole time, as I'm seeing, as we're getting into the story of these agents going rogue.
Right.
And we still end, spoiler alert, but we still end with Ulbricht.
Yeah.
With a double life sentence.
Plus 40 years. With
all of this nefarious acts. I think from rogue agents. I don't know how this doesn't get muddied.
That's the word that we've probably used more to describe this than anything else. And I don't know that there's a better one, is that this is all very nefarious.
Yeah.
Is that everything in this is at a point where the lines of morality have been so blurred between the criminals and law enforcement that it's hard to tell at any point anymore who is the good guys, who's out for their own gain, and who is really the villain.
Mm-hmm. It seems like, and I'll just speculate for a moment.
Sure.
Or just give an opinion. It seems like Duryagan, however we pronounce it, is the only one that kind of comes out of this with his hands clean in terms of how he handled the investigation.
Up until the end, yes.
Yeah, he's the one that did the investigating. He's the one that put the dossier together. And then somebody took it like a football and kicked it into a hornet's nest of, like you mentioned, the letter organizations.
Yeah,
gave this information to people that the what is it? The Homeland Security, the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah,
I get that is existing. That's in existence for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like here, sharing information ended up like they would make a great Scorsese film.
Yeah. Well, and that's the bit that we're getting into right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is where all of these characters, the stage is kind of set to now, we're going to do that cutaway shot. We're in the bar on the docks.
Yeah.
And the agents, the cops, the law enforcement agents who are fighting one another for control over the investigation, one of them is going to go sit down with the dirty cop that has taken everything over and have a conversation and not only try to figure out how to cover their tracks, but how do we build a case now that gets everybody else out of it except for the people that we want involved.
Yeah. And somebody says, we'll pin it on Ulbricht.
So
again, not trying to get too far into it. But.
Right. So Bridges goes rogue 7 months into the investigation, as McFarlane says. And 7 months in, what they have on Sean Bridges is that he secretly seizes $2 million from Karpeles'. Now, this is the guy that they believe is in charge of the Silk Road at the time. Karpeles' Wells Fargo account, which Karpeles was using in the operation of Mount Go. So to recap what that means, right? Ulbricht had this really big issue when he started the Silk Road, and that was with the Bitcoin wallet. Now, a Bitcoin wallet is anonymous. It's an anonymous way that you can transfer money back and forth, but you access it with a PIN. Now, any number of people could have that PIN number. You and I could share a Bitcoin wallet if we wanted to at this time. Now, the part that Karpeles came in and fixed was that Ross and his buddy who helped him create this, they have this huge hole because essentially what they did is they copied a shopping cart algorithm. And a shopping cart algorithm will always allow for the credit card companies to get a kickback. So when you charge your MasterCard and you charge $100 on it, well, MasterCard actually gets 5% of that. That's how the credit card companies make their money. Outside of interest and all that, it's a huge racket. So that 5% of every transaction was going nowhere. It was just money that was being lost. It was money that the Silk Road admin wasn't getting. It was money that was just going into this vacant direction on the algorithm that went nowhere. And so money was being lost every transaction. And that money was just out there to be claimed in cyberspace somewhere. And so when we're looking at this 2013 Forbes magazine where the Dread Pirate Roberts says, I wasn't the one who started the Silk Road. I took it over from a guy because he was having issues with the wallet. This is the issue that he's talking about, is that the Silk Road, every transaction is literally bleeding money. And so with Karpeles, according to Duryagan, Karpeles is the one that goes in and fixes the Silk Road Bitcoin wallet because that's his business. And so now, 7 months into the investigation, Sean Bridges finds Karpeles. He finds this Wells Fargo account that he's got, which presumably is the one that is taking all of these extra kickbacks from the Silk Road. It's attached to Mount Go, which is spelled Gox. And Bridges sees an opportunity for him to steal somebody's money anonymously. And so he does. He takes $2 million. Now, for a lot of us, that's an unfathomable amount of money. But for Karpeles, it's enough to, quote unquote, get his attention. It's later discovered that Bridges did this so that he could alert Karpeles that the U.S. government had him on its radar and that the walls were closing in on them so that they could avoid prosecution. Bridges is doing so much on the Silk Road. He's making so much money. He's learning so much about it and doing so many things that are for nefarious self-gain in conjunction with the NSA that what he decides to do is to take $2 million to alert the guy in charge, hey, they're going to shut this down and we're both going to lose our cash cow. It's still unknown what involvement Bridges had with Karpeles in the preceding months, but Bridges issued a search and seizure warrant because he didn't want a criminal case to proceed. So if the U.S. government obtained Mount Go records, they might see his name on them and discover his misdeeds. So not surprisingly, 2 days before he seized Karpeles' money, he made sure that he got his own money out. Mm-hmm. So Bridges liquidates his own account, takes $2 million from Karpeles to alert them that something's going on, and then files a search and seizure warrant so that he has the ability to make sure his name's not on it or can redact it whenever he needs to.
This is the point that's very interesting to me because at this point we've got this rogue agent. It was Force, right?
Right.
Force and Bridges.
Yeah, Force and Bridges.
Who took the money?
Bridges took the money.
Elsewhere, cut to the news scene, we still have McFarland and Duryagan fighting for control over this investigation. This is something that Bridges went rogue without the knowledge of Duryagan and McFarland, potentially the two lead investigators, the people leading the investigation.
The guys that are in the whizzing match to try to get the lead investigator.
Yeah, he subverts them behind their backs and gets Richard Kay, the assistant U.S. attorney, to sign off on the seizure.
On this warrant. Yeah.
So here we're seeing the beginning of,
And this is another really important character.
yeah,
Is
Richard
K. Right? Because Richard K. at this point is not aware that the lead investigators, Derjagen and McFarland, are unaware
Yeah.
that Bridges has gotten this warrant behind their back. So now Bridges has Richard K. sort of accomplishing his move.
Yeah.
But K doesn't know that this warrant has nothing to do with the Silk Road investigation.
Yeah. It's actually an attempt to alert Karpeles.
To deliberately undermine the integrity of an ongoing investigation,
Yep.
to use the government's own words in the court case against Bridges. So Force and Bridges also go after the bitcoins on the Silk Road, but they did so in secret so that they could keep the money for themselves. All right, so according to Force, he pretended to be a drug smuggler for a cartel, and he gains the confidence of the Dread Pirate Roberts. He asked him to coordinate a large-scale sale with one of the Silk Road's top cocaine vendors, a user that was going by the name Google-Eyed. Now remember, the Silk Road famously deals in user amounts of narcotics. That was the primary thing that was bought and sold on the Silk Road. These are user amounts of narcotics, so it's small. They're not sending, 10 kilos of black tar heroin somewhere so that it can be cut and put out. I don't know how black tar heroin works, but that's not what they're doing. Yeah, they're
Get
sending
scooped out.
Yeah, they're sending 2 ounces of the purple Kush to somebody in a DVD case that's on the other side of the country, not sending a brick, not 2.25 pounds of marijuana to somebody across the country so that they can distribute it. So these are user amounts. So these are really, really small amounts. So the people that are on the Silk Road are typically really low-level dealers. They're not distributors.
We're not talking about
street
smuggling a car that has secret compartments in the tires and in the engine block
Right.
and everything, with kilos of.
Yeah, this isn't Narcos,
Yeah.
right?
I was
This
trying to
is-
think of that show.
Yeah, this is really, really low-level stuff that's happening. But Google-Eyed, one of the top cocaine vendors, starts working with DPR and, unbeknownst to them, also with Karl Mark Force. Now, allegedly, the Dread Pirate Roberts tasks a guy named Curtis Green, one of the staff members, with setting up the deal. So here's what happens. Force says, as his alias, look, I want to do a big cocaine deal. But the problem is, you guys don't do big deals. You only do little deals. So here's what I'll do. I got a huge shipment that I can send. I'll sell it to one of your vendors, and he can parse it out. He can do the little stuff and send out the user amounts to whoever he wants to. Because we want to capitalize on this.
This is from every TV show where you've got a big deal. Well, let's do one big deal, cash out, and then we're done.
Well,
this is the ruse that he's being played.
Right, and for them, it almost looks like this is an experiment. This is their first big-time drug dealer that's come to them, and he's going to see whether or not he can move a large shipment of cocaine to somebody who'd be willing to do the legwork and put it out into smaller shipments. And that's one of the things he actually says. So he's like, look, this doesn't do me much good. I don't have the time to send this to, 1,200 people. But I can take this big shipment and send it to somebody. If you've got somebody that can move it, we would like to figure out how to use the Silk Road in conjunction with a large cocaine operation.
In supply chain management, you always start with that.
Right.
Getting from the manufacturer large amounts and then parsing it out to individual.
And so DPR's intrigued by this idea. So he goes and talks to Google-Eyed and he says, look, Curtis Green, he's one of the admins on the site. He says, Curtis, I want you to set up the deal. When approached by Green, Google-Eyed, this person who is one of the top cocaine vendors, he's like, look, this seems fishy. Something about this just doesn't seem right. This not only is this not in the spirit of what the Silk Road is supposed to be, But it's weird that this guy came and found us to try to figure it out. There's something about this I don't like. I'm out.
His instincts are on point.
Right. And so Green, who is not a drug dealer, who is just an admin on the Silk Road, he's a computer programmer, he's a granddad that lives in the middle of Ohio. Green's like, well, I can't really pass up this opportunity. If this guy's not going to do it, if Google Eyed isn't, I'll give it a shot. And so Green decides...
His instincts are not on point.
Right. So he decides that he's going to accept delivery and gives Force, who is posing as this huge cocaine kingpin, his home address instead of the place where he could ship it to Google Eyed. And so what happens is the day that the package is supposed to be delivered, a SWAT team shows up at the home of Curtis Green and arrests him. That there's a delivery in the form of the Central Ohio SWAT. Once in custody, Green is interrogated by none other than Carl Mark Force and Sean Bridges, our two
who we
dirty
know are
agents.
dirty and are later convicted.
The rest of the Silk Force task team of Baltimore is in the interrogation, and during this interrogation, Curtis Green gives them his admin login to the Silk Road. Now, we need to pull back just a little bit here and realize that all of this is happening outside of the purview of DPR. This is all happening outside of the purview of the people that are involved in the Silk Road. So Curtis Green is taken from Ohio. He's grabbed by a SWAT team. And unless you're one of Curtis Green's neighbors, you don't know what happened. This isn't a huge news story. They take him, shove him in a van, and ship him to Baltimore, where he's interrogated by the entire Silk Road team, including two dirty cops who now have Curtis Green's admin login. Why that's important is that Green, as an admin, has the ability to change things on the Silk Road in real time.
The Silk Road, again, quick refresher, was built upon privacy, anonymity, which is now no longer.
So he could go back, let's say, 6 months to a 6-month-old transaction. And if Bridges and Force wanted to, they could change all the details about that transaction as they appear in the logs.
Their security is compromised, is to sum it up.
Completely compromised. So Bridges pressures Green to show him how to exploit, now that he's got the admin logins, how to exploit the Silk Road system, including how to change passwords and take over accounts. So now they've got the ability to take over other users' accounts and act as them. After gaining access to the site, Bridges leaves the interrogation room, and he immediately uses this new knowledge to hijack and empty the accounts of some of the top Silk Road vendors. And he moves the funds to Carpelis's Bitcoin exchange, Mt. Go. Here's one of the things that's interesting, though, is Bridges did not move the Bitcoins directly from the Silk Road. He did a thing that's known as laundering. Now, we hear this term a lot, but not very many of us know what it means. And to launder something, when you're talking about money laundering in particular, means that you basically frame a third party for being the ones that actually took the money.
You want to obscure. You don't want to take $20 out of someone's wallet and wave it at them. So you want to obscure or pin it on someone else, or obscure the trail completely. Right. In this case, that's not what happened.
It's that way with Ponzi schemes. It's that way with money laundering schemes. A lot of white-collar criminals, this is their go-to thing, is to launder money. And that's exactly what Bridges does. So Bridges takes this money, these Bitcoins.
21,000
Bitcoins, and then pushes them through Green's account.
The person they have in custody.
So he transfers 21,000 bitcoins to steal them, transfers them to Green's account. So now it looks like Green's the one that took them because he wanted everybody on the Silk Road to have a suspect. Now remember, the exchanges are anonymous, but you can trace it from the Silk Road, how the money changed hands. And then once it leaves the Silk Road and goes into account, poof, it's gone. Nobody knows who Green really is. Green's using an alias name. But all these people that are using the Silk Road, the administrators on the Silk Road, are pretty tech savvy. Those that are looking at the back end at the logs can see that 21,000 bitcoins have now been added to the wallet of Curtis Green because Bridges wanted people to suspect him. He wanted Silk Road vendors and users to know, here's the person who stole my bitcoins. It's Curtis Green.
In fact, Green would later testify that he set me up to take the fall. He wanted to, quote, make sure that it was me that did it. So he was very calculated. It was very well thought out, in my opinion.
Yeah. Curtis Green's testimony since then, and this, we're about to get into one of the biggest conspiracies on the entire Silk Road. Green's testimony since then is that he would never be afraid if Ross got out of prison. But he is fearing for his life because Force and Bridges now are. Bridges continues to work this plan now that he's set up Green as the fall guy. When it's discovered that the bitcoins are stolen, Green was immediately accused, and during the interrogation, so this is not just the people that are on the Silk Road that are being alerted to Green now having laundered this money. It's also, remember, everybody in the Silk Road Task Force in Baltimore has Green's login now. Mm-hmm. They're seeing this activity. Justin Herring, a Baltimore Attorney General, Assistant U.S. Attorney General, overseeing McFarland, screams at Green, come on, we know you stole it. We know you did it. Because all of the evidence points to him. Evidence that was set up and put into play by Sean Bridges. Sean Bridges, the Secret Service agent on loan to the NSA. The NSA, an organization that is never formally mentioned in any of the court documents other than Bridges was on loan to them. Green gets pulled aside by an agent who coaxes a confession out of him. They said, come on, these are bad guys that we're trying to catch. Just help us out. Mm-hmm. I wish I could, Green kept saying it. It doesn't make sense for me to steal the money, the bitcoins. If I was that type of person, why would I steal if the night that I'm going in front of 15 agents, I would have had done it weeks before in the comfort of my home. End quote.
That's a good point.
It made no sense to me whatsoever. It blew my mind, quoted Green. And as Green later testifies, he set me up to take the fall. He wanted to make sure that it was me that did it, so he was very calculated, and it was well thought out, in my opinion. These are actual quotes from the court case where Green is testifying against Sean Bridges. The interrogators threatened to tear up Green's cooperation agreement and send him to prison. This is Herring, quote, we don't think you're telling the truth, and since you lied to us, we're going to take that away, end quote. Green was a father and grandfather, begs them for a lie detector test, but our other friendly accomplice, Karl Mark Force, put an end to it every time. According to the U.S. government, in their case against Force and Bridges, they also duped DPR into believing that Green was behind the theft. Allegedly, DPR, which we've said multiple times, it is the Dread Pirate Roberts, which is multiple people using the absolute admin account in the Silk Road. DPR then went to Force, thinking that he still had cartel connections because Force is still posing as this drug kingpin, and asked him to track Green down and retrieve the vendor's money. So he's going to track down Green. He's going to retrieve the 21,000 Bitcoins.
Yeah.
And DPR did this. Why? This is the thing that gets me, is that this plan is very juvenile.
Mm-hmm.
Force agrees to it, though, because he's got Green already in custody, and so he plays along and pretends to catch and kill Green. Now, this is really odd to me, because why, if you were the Dread Pirate Roberts, do you reach out to this guy who's this cocaine dealer from South America who tells you he's going to be able to move a big shipment? Then you find out that Green's robbed $21,000. Now, at this point, DPR doesn't know that Green is in custody of the Baltimore the Baltimore Homeland Security Department. He doesn't know that he's being questioned by the Silk Road Task Force. And so the only thing I can think is, in the mind of DPR, whoever that is at this time, this guy stole 21,000 Bitcoin from people, which at that point in time is not a ton of money, right? Bitcoin, on average, and we'll put it that way, because there are times when it was worth more, there are times when it was worth less. On average, during the life of the Silk Road, a Bitcoin is worth about 50 cents, right? So not to say that $10,500 is not a significant sum of money, because it certainly is, but he's going to kill a guy over it. And he reaches out to a South American drug boss in order to do it.
As far as DPR knows, if he's gotten the story that Green stole this money and disappeared into the nether sphere,
yeah,
the last person to see him or to work with him was this new drug kingpin. So it does make sense, although there should be a bunch of red flags.
Well, here's the biggest one to me. All of the evidence that DPR asked for this hit comes from a one Karl Mark Force. Agent Force provides all of the evidence that DPR has personally asked him, as the head of this South American cartel, to execute this hit on Curtis Green. Does that make sense to you? Looking back now we know that Force and Bridges are dirty cops.
No, it's completely tainted. Anything that they say is out for their own personal wealth enhancement or obscuring their misdeeds.
So let's go back now to the non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle on which the Silk Road was founded states that nothing can be bought or sold on the Silk Road that would harm a third party. And yet here, Force has put forth a murder-for-hire scheme, which completely violates this non-aggression principle. It would seem to violate everything that the Dread Pirate Roberts himself stood for.
I mean, the evidence points that this is another lie from Force.
But if this were brought up, even if it wasn't charged, casually in a court case against a 26-year-old with no violent crimes, it would certainly taint the way that the judge and the state looked at it.
In the jury.
It's not believed that DPR was involved in this because everything came from Agent Force himself after he and Bridges had infiltrated the Silk Road, after they had talked to Green about how to steal passwords, after they had everything for the admin, and after they already knew how to change information on the Silk Road in real time, all of which is found in the court documents in the prosecution against these two guys. They had the ability to fabricate the whole thing. Green said under oath, quote, "When I saw the murder for hire transcripts they were in line with Force's narrative and exactly what he portrayed." So was it there or did they put it there? I don't know. End quote.
Was DPR actually involved with a potential murder for hire, or was it something completely fabricated by Force?
There's no way of knowing.
Yeah.
What we do know, though, is that the Silk Road Task Force in Baltimore, the Duryagan in Chicago, they have no evidence of this.
Mm-hmm.
The only evidence that they had that this ever happened came from information presented to them by the only guy with any interest in making this happen and making himself look good. Karl Mark Force,
Later convicted.
is a known dirty agent.
Mm-hmm.
Force and Bridges, though, don't feel like this is enough, so they go on and they extort DPR on other occasions. They use pieces of Duryagan's investigation as leverage, along with threats of exposure and even death threats to DPR. In one instance, they left DPR a message using the name Death from Above and told him that they had identified him and they were going to take revenge for having killed Green. Eventually, they settled on extorting them. So now Force has created this narrative where there are other people that are upset with Green's murder, and now other people know about it, and other people know that it was DPR. And so these two dirty agents are now extorting the guy that's in charge. Now, it's important at this point that we take a step away from the story and look again at the characters. Karpeles is not a criminal mastermind. Karpeles is a guy that runs a money exchange.
Yeah, he's a finance guy.
Right? Ross Ulbricht, no matter what his motivations were at the time, is a genius-level human being.
Mm-hmm.
He was getting his PhD in physics. He graduated with honors from Stanford. And we're not talking about just a kid that's trying to figure stuff out at the library about how to code. Now, it's true, he was not a trained coder. Coding was not part of anything that he did. But we would be remiss not to realize that a guy of that level of intellect could figure some things out pretty easily. But none of these guys are crime lords.
Mm-hmm.
And time again, their actions show it. Like, we know you killed Curtis Green. We're going to come after you unless you pay us money not to. I don't know any character in any mob movie that would have bought that.
Yeah.
Good grief.
Definitely not Jack Nicholson. And
No, Mary Crawley in Downton Abbey, when she was being extorted, ignored it because she was like, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
And yet, DPR shells out time and time and time again. Another time they used the name French Maid.
Yeah, the names they came up with are very interesting.
Death from Above,
French Maid.
And the two corrupt agents tried to sell DPR, quote, information concerning the government's investigation into the Silk Road. Force, though, out of habit, signed one of the messages with his first name, Carl. To cover this up, he later said his name was, quote, Carla Sophia, quote, a Silk Road user with
Nice cover.
many girlfriends and boyfriends on the site.
So he
invents this alias after he makes a mistake. Now, what's interesting about this particular mistake is that this is the type of mistake that they will use in order to try to pin everything on Ross.
Yeah. Occam's razor would tell us that this is Karl Mark Force, but he invented this person that is a bi-leaning, bi meaning bi,
Right.
part of the LGBT, who has many boyfriends and girlfriends on the site.
Yeah. Named French Maid.
Yeah.
And he signs it Carl and says, oh, my name's Carla.
I meant Carla.
So these schemes and others netted the pair around 24,000 Bitcoin, 23,984 to be exact. Although it's unknown how many still, to this day, remain hidden. Now, the thing about Bitcoin that's so interesting that we need to understand is these 23,984, the 24,000 Bitcoin, will round up for ease of use and conversation. These 24,000 Bitcoin we know about. The ones that are hidden, now that these two evil men are out of prison, they may still have access to. Now we're going to take a jump. We're going to look back at what's happening during this time to Jared Duryagan. Duryagan's investigation is completely derailing. in no small part to the fact that 2 Baltimore agents are not just embedded in the Silk Road, they're using it for their own good, and they are giving pieces of Der Jagen's investigation to DPR for money. That is a proven fact. It comes out in the court cases that that's exactly what's happening, because the Homeland Security operations, the DEA, the Secret Service, the IRS, everybody now is in on everything that's happening in this investigation. And as Der Jagen is getting closer and closer and closer to Mark Karpeles and Ashley Barr, those guys are getting information from these embedded agents about exactly what's happening. So what do we see happen? Der Jagen's investigation begins to unravel.
Do you remember in The Departed, Mark Wahlberg's character is continually asked by the rat, by the mole that's placed in the investigation to find out more information into the investigation. Mm-hmm. He's continually asked who he has embedded in the crime family, where they're at. I remember his answer. I'm not going to say it, but he uses very salty language to tell them where they can go shove their questions and where they can go. I think this was his fear, is this happening that we're about to see happen to Der Jagen's investigation. He had a great investigation, very tight-knit, and as soon as it got leaked internally into the government,
game over. Mark Force, we got the dirty cops. We also have McFarland. McFarland was one who leaked it internally, but I keep coming back to The Departed. There's all these characters that, every time Marky Mark gets mad about a question into the investigation, this is why. Because he's afraid of this happening. So Der Jagen's investigation is derailed because of the actions of Bridges and Force as it relates to something we briefly mentioned a little earlier. This search and seizure warrant. Because the search and seizure warrant was granted by Richard Kay. Remember, he's the assistant U.S. attorney in Baltimore.
He granted the search and seizure.
To Bridges without knowing that McFarland and Der Jagen did not know about it.
Yep.
Now that search and seizure warrant has been granted and been executed, Der Jagen can't get the search and seizure warrant that he needs on Karpeles because it's already been granted and executed. Karpeles is continually scrambling to escape the government's pursuit. However, Der Jagen was sure he had his man, so he really continues to be like a hound on a bone pursuing this guy, even though he's been literally hamstrung in doing so. On May 17th, 2013, there's a conference call between Der Jagen and the assistant U.S. attorney, Krickbaum from Chicago. Krickbaum is Krickbaum. So it's Krickbaum, Der Jagen, McFarland, and Herring, who's an AUSA from Baltimore. And our buddy Richard Kay,
who initially granted the search and seizure of Karpeles.
So during the call, Kay states that, quote, he was trying to work on an interview with Karpeles. Krickbaum, the other AUSA, this is the one from Chicago, says, what purpose was this interview for? And Kay replies, quote, we wanted to know more about Karpeles' money and business, to ask him directly about his knowledge of the Silk Road, end quote. Now, Der Jagen is going to express serious concerns over that approach because Karpeles is their main guy. Mm-hmm. He continually says that if Kay uses this information that they developed on Karpeles for his own use, that they're going to alert Karpeles as to what's going on. He's going to dump everything, and they're going to lose the entire investigation. So Kay says, fine, you know what? We'll hold off for a few months until Der Jagen is prepared with his indictment. This is just a classic case of a power struggle in which everyone is trying to undermine the rest of them. Now, Kay at this point probably has a vested interest in covering his own behind, because while he's on this call, he has to tell them that he will not grant them a search and seizure warrant. But he can't tell them why Otherwise, it's going to bring into light the fact that he's already done it with somebody else, that it's already been executed, and that information is lying somewhere, being redacted and doctored. I'm sure Kay has this information. Not as speculation, but I'm sure Kay has that information. And if he knows that a search and seizure warrant has been executed, why would these guys be asking for it again in these types of investigations, especially those where they're considered moles and people are working different angles? One of the things that happens time and time again, and this was told to us not only by our friend Moss, who has helped out in some of these investigations. Moss, again, is our internet tech guru who has helped with multiple internet crimes.
Yeah, he works in cybersecurity.
As well as a good friend of mine who is a police chief and has worked in some of these same things.
The last thing you do is you go to the boss and you go, hey, what do you think? What's you got anything you want to tell us? You don't want to tip the boss off.
Right.
You want to wait and gather evidence and then go execute.
Nor do you want to tip off the guys in the other departments.
Yeah.
Remember, McFarland and Derjagen are on this call. Bridges is a Baltimore agent. Kay knows that there's a fight going between them.
I really feel for Derjagen. He is just trying to get the investigation complete and go, hey, here's my findings.
He knows that there's this power struggle.
Yeah.
Right? And Derjagen's request for search and seizure warrant is blocked. And instead, what they say is, you know what? You're not going to get search and seizure. I'll just go talk to the guy.
Yeah. No.
That's absolutely insane.
Yeah. No. Don't go talk to him. Don't tip him off.
Yeah. Don't let him know what's going on in the investigation. Little does Derjagen know that at this point, though, he's being tipped off to everything that's going on, or whoever DPR is. He believes it's Karpeles. All the evidence points to him, like hard evidence points to him. Mm-hmm. And so he's continually being tipped off by the very guys that Kay gave this search and seizure warrant to. Even though with Kay's assurance, Derjagen was worried that he was going to go behind his back. He expressed concern to McFarland, agent to agent, leader to leader. And McFarland assures him, quote, I have complete control over Kay. I was the one that gets to decide whether or not Karpeles would be interviewed. And I'm going to honor Derjagen's request not to pursue or interview Karpeles. End quote. On another conference call a few months later, Derjagen specifically asked Herring if there were any developments with Karpeles and Kay. Specifically, if there were any more talks about a meeting, and Herring says that there was not. Once again, Derjagen's trust in his colleagues is the very thing that causes him to have his investigation completely shattered. Unknown to Derjagen, the guys in Baltimore, the AUSA, Herring and Kay, are working out their own deal with Karpeles. And on July 8th, the day before telling Derjagen there would be no meeting, according to the court cases, quote, Herring was notified by Kay that a face-to-face meeting was going to take place between himself and Karpeles' attorney, end quote. Neither of the AUSA from Baltimore notified Derjagen or told him about the meeting when he had specifically asked. These guys that are supposed to be on his team, he takes their word at face value, and not only does it bite him in the butt, but 2 days later, again, this is from the court transcripts, quote, Kay met in person with Karpeles' attorneys. He brought up the Silk Road and stated that Karpeles was willing to tell them who he suspects is currently running the site in order to relieve him of any potential charges, end quote. Kay then proceeded to make arrangements to meet with Karpeles himself. So he's met with his attorney. Now he's going to meet with Karpeles himself. The same evening that Derjagen met with McFarland and Herring in preparations for a coordinated meeting the next day, and still none of them mentioned the planned meeting with Karpeles or his lawyers. So at every step of the way, the guy that started this investigation, got the most information, pointed them to who he believed was their man. Immediately what starts to happen is the Baltimore AUSA goes and they meet with this guy in order to take over the case. Because if they have a meeting with Karpeles and can say, look, we know that Duryagan thinks this is him. We've actually talked to him. He says it's not, but that he can give us the guy. He knows why all the evidence points towards him, but he can give us the guy. This should be our case. This is just nothing but egos flying back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
At the coordination meeting, another law enforcement agent was brought in. This time from the FBI in New York City. And their lead investigator, Christopher W. Tarble. And the Southern District of New York Assistant U.S. Attorney, Saren Turner. So, just to simplify everything.
Yeah, there's so many people.
We've got the AUSA from Chicago. We've got the AUSA from Baltimore. Baltimore Homeland Security, Chicago Homeland Security. And now we're involving a third city, a third agency, and another AUSA.
Everybody wants a piece of this.
As we're bringing in the FBI from New York. It also says they were joined by multiple DOJ and CCSIP attorneys. Now, I have no idea on earth what CCSIP stood for. It's one of those acronyms I'd never even heard of. CCSIP is the world's premier cybersecurity company. Cybersecurity certification. CCSIP attorneys will advise on what is and isn't legal in the realm of cybersecurity. FBI agent Tarble brought an important piece of the government's investigation to the table. Something that neither McFarland nor Duryagan had found before. And that is the location of the server that hosts the Silk Road. Now remember, there's a technology that's being used on the Silk Road known as Tor, the onion router. And what Tor does is Tor pings several different computers and servers and things so that your location is masked. Now Tarble is saying, look, I went in on this investigation. I'm coming to this meeting because I have a piece of information that neither of you two have. You're months and months and months into this investigation. Over a year now, because this is happening in 2013. You're over a year into this investigation and you don't know one thing that I know. And that's where this site is being hosted from. Which is
a groundbreaking.
It's essential information if they're going to build a case.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that Tarble, in this conversation, tells them that the Silk Road is being hosted on a server in Iceland, and that he was already seeking a copy of it from the Revenchik Metropolitan Police.
I actually know how to pronounce this name from Eurovision.
Okay, yeah, give it to me.
Reykjavik. Yeah.
Reykjavik,
And
spelled R-E-Y.
I'm sure it's still not perfect, but that's...
Yeah, R-E-Y-K-J-A-V-I-K, Reykjavik.
Yeah.
Metropolitan
Reykjavik.
Police Department.
Something along those lines.
So, after this meeting happens, Force and Bridges now have reason to fear that any communication between themselves and DPR is going to be accessible to Tarble. Because he's getting a copy of that server. Reykjavik's going to give it to him. Mm-hmm. Reykjavik being the city.
The Metro PD.
Yeah. So, Duryagan does the only thing he thinks he can do. He briefs his entire case to the group. Once again, he identifies Karpeles as their main target, the man behind DPR and the Silk Road, and the CCSIP attorneys overseeing the meeting asked if, quote, any other officer had any case on Karpeles, end quote. All the Baltimore attendees, including McFarland, Herring supervisor, and Bridges, all remained silent despite knowing that a meeting had just taken place with Karpeles' attorneys the day before. They withheld information in an intelligence meeting, pointing to the guy that was behind this. The attorneys went on to say that, quote, since the information Duryagan shared was brought in good faith, that no other office should attempt to pursue Karpeles.
It's like we see the right path through this whole investigation. We see Duryagan doing his best to fully vet the information that he finds and interpret the interpret the evidence, which he believes points to Karpeles, and he keeps on saying this. And new people get added. They get the information, and we see his investigation subverted again with a meeting that has already happened with Karpeles. And in this investigation meeting, I'm just summarizing, this investigation meeting, again, not telling Duryagan. I don't know, I'm blanking for a second. Not telling Duryagan that this meeting has already happened. And again, if they had, maybe we would see in the investigation change course.
There's a point at which you have to ask the question, if anybody told the truth.
Yeah.
We've compared this a lot to Martin Scorsese films, and I feel the same way as I'm watching those movies, right? And a lot of times whenever I'm watching cop dramas and things like that, or even hospital dramas, where people are trying to protect their ego by being shady about the way that they're sharing information, right? Because the cardiothoracic surgeon wants the surgery to happen this one way, but the neurosurgeon wants it to happen another, and then so they start this fighting about.
And Dr. House comes in and tells them they're all wrong.
Yeah, but they start having these conversations about like whose surgery is more important to have first, who's going to get the patient first, why are they going to get him first, and in the course of that, they're all withholding information from one another. Well, I have this scan. Well, did you see the CTs that I ordered? No, we didn't know that you ordered CTs. Oh yeah, I did it. This is what they read out. This needs to happen first. And it happens in every cop drama as well. The FBI comes in and they're taking over jurisdiction and like, what do you have? And then the cheeky local cop gives them most of the information, but doesn't tell them that, Mrs. Brown down the road saw something that she told him over, a cup of sweet tea, and he just decides to leave that out so that he can swoop in and be the hero at the end. And there's always this tension with, if you just told the truth, if you were just honest about what was going on, how different would it be? And really, the thing that gets me is whose lives would not have been ruined in the process. Originally said that this was going to be a 4-part series, and it looks the longer that we get into it, the more research that we do, that we might need to stretch it into 5. But at this meeting in New York, under good faith, Duryagan again puts confidence in his colleagues that no other officer, no other office should attempt to pursue Karpeles except for Duryagan. Already, the wheels are in motion to subvert everything he's done by the very men who he has trusted with his entire case. And whether you agree with the Silk Road or not, whether you agree that there were crimes to be prosecuted or not, the egos of the men in this room will be the destruction of the lives of a 27-year-old at this time. That's next on the untold story of Ross Ulbricht, the Silk Road, and the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Please stop. are hurting me. Please stop. You know what you're saying isn't true. You're hurting me, and you're hurting my family.